You're listening to the 40 Thrive Podcast, episode 17.
You're listening to the 40 Thrive Podcast, the show created for women 40 and beyond, ready to shake things up. Get exclusive access to expert advice, support, and strategies that will inspire, motivate, and give you the tools to not just survive, but thrive. And now, your host, Jackie McDougall.
Welcome to the 40 Thrive Podcast. I'm excited you're here because today we're talking about money, money, money. And now just hearing about money, if you are now breaking into a cold sweat, I know some of you are out there. Don't worry, this episode is for you because we have someone here who will help us catch up and keep up and make some really great positive financial decisions. Now, if you are like, hey, I have the money, I want to do more with it, this episode is also for you because our guest today knows everything, everything in the world there is to know about money. No, but she knows a lot. So Ilyce Glink is an award-winning financial journalist, television and radio personality, syndicated columnist, and the founder of four Chicago-based companies. Her latest company is called Best Money Moves, a cloud-based mobile-first platform. This platform, employers actually provide to their employees, and they're able to measure and dial down financial stress, which in turn lowers turnover and absenteeism while fostering engagement, productivity, and better health outcomes. It's really a brilliant idea. Ilyce's financial journalism work appears on CBSNews.com and dozens of newspapers, including the Washington Post, LA Times, Chicago Tribune. Her corporate clients include everyone from Fortune 100 companies to startups. And she has written more than a dozen books on money and real estate with nearly 1 million books in print. Now, I heard of Ilyce through my longtime friend and podcast client, Wendy Miller. If you haven't checked out Wendy's show, Sex Ed the Musical, you are missing out on a really good time. So Wendy was on the 40 Thrive podcast back in episode 2. So if you want to listen to that, head on over to 40thrive.com/episode 2, aptly named, right? Wendy's amazing at giving advice on spicing things up in your life, whether you've been married a long time, you're in a new relationship, or you're single. So you definitely want to check out that episode. Thank you, Wendy, for making this connection to Ilyce because Ilyce is amazing. In this episode, Ilyce talks to us about the best ways to raise kids with positive attitudes around money, how to catch up financially and in the workforce. She's got some great tips there. Plus, we talk about life insurance. What's the right type of plan? How much coverage do we need? And then she explains the whole concept of laddering insurance and how that will save you tons of money and give you all the protection you need. So let's just get right to it. My conversation with Ilyce Glink. Welcome to the 40 Thrive podcast, Ilyce.
It's nice to be here, Jackie. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So what some people don't realize is that you are besties with Wendy Miller, who happens to be the host of Sex Ed the Musical, that I talk about all the time.
We have been friends for more than she would rather have me not say, I suppose, as well. But yes.
And I only bring that up because it's, in our 40 Thrive community, you are this financial guru with all the you help people change their lives for serious matters. And then your bestie is like talking about blowjobs on her podcast. I just love the way we connect with other women. That's all.
I think the women are changing lives for the better as well. And that's really what it's all about.
I want to talk about, when I did your intro, I mentioned all of your incredible books, but the most recent move you've made is your Best Money Moves. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So it's funny how when you turn 50, you try and start to think about life in a little bit of a different way. Like, for example, I've figured out there actually is a generational divide, and now I'm on the other side of it. You start sleeping not as well as you used to, and you start looking out and saying, what is the lasting impact that I want to have, when I depart this earth for good? And the focus of my whole career, Jackie, has been to help people make smarter decisions with their money. And I've done it through the books I've written and radio shows I've hosted and TV and video stuff, my YouTube channel. When I turned 50, actually it was about almost 51, I got this idea that there would be a way to sell into companies what I can only describe as a benefit, that companies had now reached a place where their employees were looking to them to provide them with the kind of detailed personal guidance and advice that employees had never looked to their employers for. And if employers actually stepped up and provided everything from basic financial management all the way up to solving problems with student debt, which is a huge overhang for our millennial and Gen Z employees, and solve problems dealing with healthcare costs and outcomes, that there would just be this overflow of wonderful stuff that would happen for companies in terms of productivity and increasing retention and lowering turnover and just the engagement and productivity that they were enjoying from their employees. And so I got this idea that if we started a company, which we call Best Money Moves, to create the kind of financial wellness out of general financial unwellness going on in this country and in others, it would be a good thing.
It never even occurred to me that we, as women over 40, have been moving forward. You know, I had jobs in the past, like never once did they really think about my financial wellness. And they're the ones who are paying me. First of all, I commend you. And I think that you live by example as far as my whole philosophy of we women over 40 are doing things now that are even more important, that have meaning. And so I think this is amazing what you've created, but you are teaching employers how to service or serve their employees by creating this financial wellness.
Well, thank you. It's actually very exciting and scary. I just want to reemphasize the scary part to start a company at any age. And when you're in your 50s, which is a time when most people are starting to think about retirement and how are they going to get, they've got kids that are just about all through college like I do. And most people are thinking, okay, I've got $15,000 in the bank and now I'm going to try and save for retirement. I want to change that paradigm up a little bit. I want to have people understand that there are avenues out there, things that employers are gearing up to do, are already doing. And it's really about taking the very best advantage of these opportunities that you can. And so with Best Money Moves, I anticipate being in a place where using artificial intelligence and machine learning, that we're able to deliver to employees the very best experience that they could imagine at work so that they in turn can do their very best work for the companies that employ them. And that's just a really nice, symbiotic relationship.
A lot of these employees are the ones who are kind of coming up, the younger millennials. I don't even know when millennials stop. So even younger than that. So many of these employees are our children, the women of our generation. We've some people, I know that you have older kids. Mine are still a little bit on the younger side, but what do you think that they can learn that maybe, did we fail them a little bit? I mean, you probably didn't because you're all like money brilliant, but the rest of us, did we fail our kids in a way that they need to get this from their employer?
So I think that a lot of times kids look to their parents for help. And a lot of times parents don't have any answers to give back to their kids, right? And so if you're trying to come up with a story in a way that you're going to explain to your kids exactly how their financial lives are going to go, a lot of times you're going to miss the mark because as you go through it for the first time, the generations have shifted again. We're all living longer than we did 25, 30, 40 years ago. We have different expenses on our backs than we used to. That whole sandwich generation thing has now expanded. And I'm happy to go into all of these things. But the bottom line is that the way that your grandparents or great-grandparents thought that their financial lives would go, back when the dads, and I say this, recognizing the genders have completely, the way that we assign gender, work, and all that has shifted. But back 50, 60 years ago, generally the dads went to work and the moms stayed home and raised their kids. The dads stayed at their job for 20, 30, 40 years till they retired. They got a pension. And that was how financial lives worked in the first half and even 2/3 of the 20th century. What happened after women started going into the workforce and liked it after World War II, after costs started to rise, extremely, people's salaries stopped increasing at a rate that kept pace with inflation. And then you also had just a shift in how, things like school and university was managed, for example, and how those costs were paid for. All of that stuff has started to change so dramatically that even your parents' experience with money is going to be different from our Gen Z kids' experience with money. And so even though you pass down the very best that you know how, if you even did know how, and a lot of people don't, it's still going to be different for them. And so there's still an opportunity to bring to light great money management tools and experiences and share that in a way that helps people in the next generation and generations to come make sense of where they are in their place in this universe.
People who have kids in the workforce now are lucky because Best Money Moves is out there with some of the employers and you're teaching their kids maybe what they didn't necessarily learn. But for me, I mean, I have a 12, 13, and 14-year-old. What are the most important things I can be teaching at this age?
So I think transparency is really important. And I've been teaching my kids about that, and they're still learning about it, right? So when our kids were little, they were, 3 and 5, I would take them to the grocery store with me, and they were kind of math kids, and we would push them to do little math problems. And I'd say, look, we've got 2 milks here. Do they look the same to you? And they'd say, yeah, they look the same. And I'd say, okay, one is $3.99 and one is $1.99. Do you know why? And they'd say no. And we'd talk about the differences and how much money they would save and what they could do with the $2 of savings and what sales were and how you looked for, the date on it is more important than the price and milk is milk and all the rest. And, just those little lessons when they're really little, that helps because it makes money feel less, intangible. The problem today is that nobody really uses cash anymore. I mean, if you think about it, the only time I use cash is when I go to a hotel and I'm either leaving something for the housekeeper or I'm giving a tip to a guy who's helping me with my bags or got a cab for me or something like that.
Right.
People don't use cash anymore. And when you take cash out of the equation, money stops feeling real. It just is an electronic transfer. And that's just ethereal, right? So you have to bring ethereal stuff into the real world so that your kids can have an understanding of it, whether that means you've got piles of pennies and you're having them pay for things in the house with pennies, or they're saving their allowances and you're paying out allowance in cash as they're little. There are lots of different ways to give the message to them. And when they get older, like you said to me earlier before we went on the air that your kids are 12, 13, and 14. Okay, and mine are 21 and 23. But at your age, our kids were managing basic stuff, like if they needed to get somewhere and they needed public transportation or they had to take the train downtown by themselves, or they needed to buy something for school, we would talk about that. Or they had to literally figure out how much money they needed to spend in a week and then factor in if they wanted to go out with friends or they wanted to buy a book or whatever that was. Those kinds, again, of real lessons are important, but we also started sharing with them things about our money that we were putting away for them, what a 529 plan was and how we were saving for college, how we expected them to contribute to their college educations and the expenses that go along with that, and how sometimes we just had to say no to them. Like, we're not paying for you to go to spring break down in Florida with a bunch of guys so you can drink when you're not even legal to drink. Like, no, we're not doing that. And yet that all together, those lessons of transparency, of engagement, of real life and what costs are, all of that has gone into helping our kids, now that they're 21 and 23, get ready for the next step. Like, one of my sons decided to take a quarter off of school and he just wanted to get more work experience. And we said, that's fine. You have to find a job that's going to pay all of your expenses, and let's go through what those might be. Here's how much your apartment might cost, and here's how much gas for your car is, and you're going to have to feed yourself. And he found an internship that paid for all of that and even put a little savings in the bank. If we hadn't prepped all those years, if we hadn't gone through those costs with him, I think he would have been totally lost. And that's how most of us feel when it's time to really take charge of our money.
If you look at the different generations, I don't want to call anybody out, including myself, but I know how to work. One thing I learned from my parents was work ethic. And even in college, I commuted to school. I had 4 jobs at a time. If you couldn't give me more hours, I was going to add a job. I know how to roll up my sleeves and get it done. But when it comes to money management, I haven't historically been as great at that. And so I feel like we did grow up at a time where money was private. They were very private about their money matters. And if they struggled, I have no idea. I mean, I'm one of 13 kids. And my dad was an elevator. Yeah. And my dad was an elevator mechanic who did very well. He put in the overtime. But you can imagine he wasn't a surgeon, and my mother was at home for many years so my point is, I'm sure there was a lot of budgeting. We still had vacations every year. So he was clearly a master at budgeting and making his money work for him. He was not one to keep credit card debt. I know that. He had told me over and over again not to do that. It would have been so incredible to learn from him in this way, because clearly he did it well, but he was also very private. So two things. I struggle a little bit with how much to share with the kids as far as like, hey, we're making this choice, or financially. Do you give them the ins and outs, or do you just give them the general rules?
If your kids asked you what it feels like to have sex, not to bring in Wendy's stuff, right? They're 12, 13, and 14. So yes. Would you say to them, hey, come on in and watch Dad and me go at it? Right? You wouldn't do that, right?
Of course not. I'd be arrested.
Because that's not what they're really asking, right? When they're like, if they said to you, what does sex feel like, Mom? You're going to give each one of them an age-appropriate response.
Correct.
And you're never going to answer more than they're actually really asking for. And when Correct. It comes to money, the same thing is true, right? We had money in the kids' names that when they turned 18 would legally go under their control. And we said to them, look, this pot of money, we just want you to know what's coming up in 6 months. So, they were 17 and a half. And we're like, here are the accounts. This pot of money is going to come, be in your own name as of the day you turn 18. And let's explain what we put this away for. This is for college and this pot over here is for college. And we expect you to use that money to help pay your college expenses. And whatever's left over, let's say you graduate early, it's left over, you'll be able to use that to start a job, give yourself options, a down payment for a house someday, buy a car if you need it. This is what this money is for. And the way we earn that money is all the things that we missed growing up. We were there for a lot, but Mom had to travel, Dad had to do, late nights some nights. That's where this money comes from. And so we want you to treat it with the respect that we've treated the making of that money. But of course, if you want to take this money and go buy a race car and travel the world and not go to college, we won't pay for college. That's your job is to be the good steward of this money, just like our job was to get you ready to go and to pay for the rest of it. And so let's partner together and you ask any questions you want. We'll answer as honestly as we can. But that's when they were 18, right? Mm-hmm. If we hadn't brought them along the path at age appropriate things along the way, that wouldn't have made any sense to them. And there were some days when they were 12 and 13 when they said, Mommy, how much money do you make? And my answer to them was, why do you want to know? And there were a lot of different reasons. Well, I just want a number. I'm like, well, numbers don't mean anything. What if I said $1 million? What if I said $15? Does that mean anything to you? And you start having a conversation that opens up the reasons behind the questions that they're asking. And that, I think, is how you get to the appropriate question and answer.
Right. Yeah, we don't necessarily talk about specifics with them. We just switched cell phone carriers. Our cell phone bill, I don't know, is like $220 a month. And so there are 5 lines or whatever. So we discussed the difference between these 2 cell phone carriers and what you get for this one and what you get for that one, and how much money it is. And so we're trying to at least share with them some of the pros and cons, because if you look across the board, they're pretty much the same amount, but one includes Netflix, one is unlimited, one is not, things like that. So it's the value for the money that I'm really trying to instill. But I also liken it to when we'll go out to dinner and, can I get a lemonade? I'm like, you can absolutely get a lemonade, but there's a lot of sugar in that. And so if you're having dessert, we're not going to do both. So if the lemonade, like you're craving the lemonade today, go for it. But when the Pizookie comes later, that won't be happening, because you have to make choices. And I think they're at an age where they really respect that and they're starting to get it.
One day at my radio show, I had people call in with their favorite ways of saving money. And somebody called in and said, we never order drinks when we go out. We don't order cocktails as adults, no beer, kids don't order sodas. And what we've seen is that we can eat out more frequently for the same dollars or even saving money because we're shaving 1/3 of the bill by not having any beverages. There's lots of ways to sort of play that for kids. You're doing it in one way, asking them to choose, drinks or dessert. You can also just say, look, Dad and I aren't going to have cocktails. You guys don't have beverages. And let's compare the bill, what it would have been at the end of the night if we'd had that versus when we don't. And then you multiply it out for them, right? Okay, so give me a math problem. We eat out twice a week, we eat out once a month, whatever the number is, times 12, times 52, times 104. What does that savings translate into? And those numbers get pretty big pretty quickly. And not only do they feel engaged in the family, because you can say, what if for a year we don't do this and we take that money and every night we set it aside, that we don't use it, and at the end of the year, let's do something really special as a family with that money. And so what you've done you've talked about short-term savings goals, long-term savings goals, and then you get the family experience at the end of it that celebrates the achievement of that goal. That teaches your kids something I think that's really important, right? It's a little bit like what I recommend for people when it comes to end-of-year holidays, right? I think that generally speaking, most kids who are in families that are sort of middle to upper middle income, let alone, the one percenters. I think we all have a lot of stuff. We tend to indulge our kids. We buy them things. And, one of the things that we did with our kids early on is, we're Jewish. So when it came to Hanukkah, this 8 days of presents was like when they were super little and you got them little Matchbox cars, that worked okay. Mm-hmm. But as they got older, and we would say to them, instead of getting you 8 little gifts, and what we did is we substituted chocolate bars, for example, versus real gifts. I said, what if we get you one gift or one big family gift? We make it a little more expensive gift. Let's decide together what we want that gift to be and how we're going to use it. And one year we bought a telescope. And the kids who were both interested in science and in the stars, we would go out in our backyard as a family on summer nights and we would watch the stars. Even in the winter, we did this. And, it was a constant reminder that we had chosen together to do something as a family that focused on sort of the money and the energy in a different way. And I think that our kids really appreciated that. And today, neither of them are particularly materialistic. They both save and are going to have good jobs. They both recognize how very fortunate they are to be getting out of school without any debt. They know many, many people at school who are just burdened by hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And I think they have a tremendous appreciation for that. It gives them the opportunity to step forward in a different way. But again, I'm not sure the appreciation would have been there had the lessons not gone along the way. And these are lessons anybody can give to any child.
Right. You don't have to be, the financial whiz that you are to. Yeah. And I will tell you right now, I am a huge believer in paying for experiences over stuff. Some of our best moments, we just last week in spring break, we went, overnight and we did a whale watch and I got it on Groupon, and it was a 2-hour experience that was unforgettable. It was just so great. And I think that's where if we're going to spend $100 here, $100 there, that's where I want to do it.
Well, I think your kids would probably surprise you because just even talking about what a Groupon is and how we're doing this and how much it costs. I remember, and I am a little bit unusual, I remember laying in bed at night worrying that my parents didn't have enough money and trying to reconstruct the budget based on what I knew that they were spending. And that isn't normal, as I've discovered in many years of therapy. But regardless, I do think having these conversations with a parent is important. So I want to go back to the idea that you would have never talked to your parents because when I was 18, my father dropped dead in my arms.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you. It was devastating, and it was devastating to our family. But it's been many, many years since he died. In fact, I've lost count. I think we're at 38 or 37. What happened was my mother didn't really have anybody to talk to about money. And I was 18 and my sisters were 16. And so she talked to us about her money. And we got an early look at having those conversations because, my father didn't have enough life insurance, certainly not what I would recommend today. But my mom went to work. She'd been an artist, so she had to go find a job that she could make some good money at, and she worked her butt off, to your point about working, and she became a wildly successful real estate agent in Chicago, where we're from. Watching that transformation was so empowering as a young adult, which I was as this was going on, 18, 19, 20, because I realized that you can really do so many different things and come from so many different places and succeed if you're willing to work your butt off. So, my mom had those conversations. I used to talk to my grandfather about stocks and investing. And so I had more lessons from him. And in our family, we've just been more transparent. as you have aging parents, it's really important to go talk to them about their money and about how things are going to play out for them as they get into their 70s, 80s, 90s, as more of us are living into our 90s and, 100s, centenarians, I think is what they're calling them. But having those conversations is important because for so many people our age in their 40s and 50s and 60s, they start being the caregivers for their elderly parents, maybe even having to pay for them while you're paying your own student loan debt off, paying for your kids come home. Our generations are spending $500 billion a year paying for their young adult kids who get out of school and can't make it work and are moving home. And so there's lots of money opportunities out there to have these conversations around.
Well, I do want to talk about, the fact is that we're trying to teach our kids, but being in our generation, there are a lot of people who the idea of retirement, sends them to a cold sweat because it doesn't seem. But before I do that, you said something, and I know that you are not a life insurance expert per se, but you mentioned that you have an amount that you suggest. So can you tell me a little bit? I mean, is that something you can go into?
As I tell everybody, I am not a licensed insurance salesperson, and I am not a certified financial planner, although they're all wonderful. CFPs can be really terrific. But I've done a lot of work and I've written a lot of books about this stuff. And so here's what I've learned. Term insurance is the cheapest, best kind of insurance that you can get. It's the least expensive. You can now get something called return of premium insurance, where most of what you put in as a premium will come back to you. And it allows you to buy the largest amount of term. If you die in the year that you're covered, you get it. And if you don't, you're not covered, you don't get it. And it's very, very simple. That's the insurance that really everybody should get. The other kinds of insurance that are out there, sort of the universal life or whole life, to me, this is insurance with a mutual fund wrapper, or it's a mutual fund investment with an insurance wrapper, whichever way you want to put about it. Think about it. What it means, though, is that you're paying for insurance and mutual funds and all the fees that go into both. And that's what makes it much more expensive. So it allows you to buy much less. And they'll talk to you until your ears fall off about how, it grows and you get the cash, the tax-free cash access. You're much better off buying a larger amount of term insurance and just moving forward. Now, how much do you need? So first of all, is who's depending on your income? So if you're a single person in your 30s and you don't have any dependents, maybe you have a dog, you don't need a lot of life insurance to cover the dog. If you've got children and the children are babies, that's important because you're going to want to make sure that you can provide for them even after you're gone. And generally there, you want to look at something that's probably between 8 and 10 times your income. So for example, if you let's say you make $100,000 a year, you would want to make sure you have something like $1 million of term life policy coverage that if you die, that would help take care of the kids. Plus you need a will to designate who's going to be their guardians. And that's a whole nother separate thing, but equally important.
That's its own episode right there.
It is equally important.
Absolutely. So my question is, should you get more insurance than you need when you are on the younger side? Because if you try to get it later, it's going to cost you more money.
There's a couple of different ways to think about that. Term life insurance is different from long-term care insurance, where that older thing typically comes into play. But let me share what we did. We employed a policy. The way that we did it is it's called laddering. So when we were in our late 20s, we had some things that we needed to take care of. And as we got into our 30s and had kids, there was more. And so we didn't need that much life insurance in our late 20s. We needed more coverage for our 30s and 40s and the early part of the 50s. And we figured once the kids were out of college, it was on them, right? But then we'd have other assets. And if we died, they'd just get the assets and they'd be fine. So we bought a policy that went for 20 years. It's called the level load coverage, right? It means the premium stays the same for 20 years. And we bought one in let's say when I was 30 and my husband was 33, and we bought another one when I was 33 and he was 36, and we bought another one when I think I was 37 and he was 40. And so now some of those, and that's just an example, it's not the specific amount or the specific ages, but so you have one starting at 1 year, and then 3 years later, another 20-year policy starts, and 3 years later, another 20-year policy starts. Or you could do it in 5-year intervals. That means on the other side, if I started at 30, when I'm 50, the first policy would have ended. And 30, let's say 55, the second policy, and when I'm 60, the last policy will end. That's called laddering. And so that means that when you really need the biggest amount of coverage, we had the bulk of our coverage, right, for the 30s, 40s, and early 50s. And then it starts to tail off because our kids are older and they don't really need the same kind of help. In fact, our older son is off the payroll entirely. You want to make sure you're getting the coverage when you need it, but not overpaying when you don't.
That is brilliant. I have never heard, I mean, it's like, oh, of course, no brainer. But at the same time, it never occurred to me. And I'm sure there are listeners right now who are like, oh, so you don't necessarily have to get this huge policy to go over the 20 years. You could go smaller and have multiple policies and then let them expire, naturally. It's brilliant.
Right. Let's say you're 30, which is probably the age that you were at or so, maybe when you had your first, right? Mm-hmm. And you have 3 kids and you're done having kids at 35. So you have to plan for when the kid at 35 is going to be on their own. That's like 21 years later. So let's say you do 25-year level load policies. If you're 35 and you get a 25-year, you'll be 60 when it ends. So you start at 30, and then let's say the next one you get is at 35, and let's say you maybe want to give it even a little more coverage, so you go 40. But for a healthy person who's non-smoking, who's 40, that should still be affordable, even at 45. So again, this is why you look for term life. It allows you to buy the biggest amount of coverage for the least amount of money. And you want to make sure you're, again, like with any service provider, you're dealing with a company that has an excellent record of customer service, excellent record of paying claims, that's financially stable. All of this information is available online, and that you work with somebody who you can trust to sell you only what you know you need and not slip other stuff in there on the side. And that's how you go about finding a good package.
Right. That's great. So I know there are a lot of people out there who are trying to maybe catch up. So maybe their kids are getting older. They don't need as much, but many of them don't even have life insurance, I would guess. But it's not the only area in their lives they're trying to catch up. So I've spoken to a lot of women over 40 about retirement, about really knowing what's next in their lives. They feel like they're aging out. I know for me, I don't have as many TV jobs that come my way. That's why I've created my own business, and I think that's why entrepreneurship has been, I think women over 50 are like big time representing in the entrepreneur world. And so some of it is because I think we're like, hey, life is short, let's go for it. And others are because we can no longer be at the whim of a boss or an industry that maybe doesn't value us the way they used to. So let's talk about those women who, maybe haven't been saving in this way or aren't necessarily looking at retirement at 65 as a viable option. What are some ways that we can really look at life right now and maybe do a little bit of catch up?
So the first thing I just want to point out is that the way that lives work out or don't work out is what gets in the way of making plans, right? So women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s may find themselves newly divorced or separated, and not having managed money. Now they're kind of bereft of knowledge, and they may be focused very much on keeping the house when it's the very last thing they should do. So that's one thing that happens. And then the next thing that happens is that people get sick. They get sick, and the insurance that you thought you could count on doesn't really cover you. And in this country right now, it's a concern over pre-existing conditions, right? So right now, current healthcare plans cover you. If you switch to a healthcare plan, they can't rule you out simply because you had a pre-existing condition. That may not always be the case going forward. And we have to fight to make sure that it is the case because, once you hit Medicare age at 65, that's great. But what do you do from 45 to 65? We have to make sure that stays intact. That right.
Absolutely.
So, healthcare aside, and of course, a divorce or something else happens, you have a child who has issues and you have to take that person under your wing, for a longer period than you planned, or your parent comes back in and needs help. These are all the things that can disrupt even a well thought out retirement plan. And I think the thing that I can tell people is, never let yourself get out of shape sort of intellectually, right? You may have stayed home, but that doesn't mean that you haven't done some really interesting things with your lives. And so there are some groups out there that you can join particularly focused on women who are in their 40s and 50s who want to get back into the workforce. And it could not be a better time. Let's just start with that. The unemployment rate is 3.8%, and there is a desperate need for people who want to come back into the workforce and do something. And even if you go back in, let's say as an admin, or I don't even think people have receptionists anymore, but there are other kinds of jobs that you can do that seemingly are lower on the scale. They're all still paying $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. They have generally come with healthcare coverage. They are not particularly physically taxing. And it may be a wonderful way for you to kind of get back into an industry that you were in with these sort of quasi entry-level jobs, or even coming back in a little bit higher level where you're able to get new skills, adapt in the new workforce, and make a new start. But it all starts with getting involved in your own home neighborhoods, your own hometowns, seeing what's going on with technology in your area, and getting yourself back up to speed. One of the things that I often suggest for women is that they look at code academies where you learn in 12 weeks or 20 weeks, or, there's lots of different lengths of time. You learn how to do basic coding, and even just getting that kind of thing on your resume can just reinvigorate your opportunities for learning and earning.
I always say, innovation is the key, right? So I have this long-term career, but when I talk to people on TV about my knowledge of podcasting, I may look like I'm getting older, because I am, as we all are. What I'm learning and what I'm teaching is now becoming mainstream. I'm on the ground floor of certain things. And so I think just finding in your industry something that maybe is up and coming or more current, and getting educated on that. So that way those other people are looking to you to educate them.
Right. And it's also about networking. So let's say you've been a stay-at-home mom, but you went to a school like, Northwestern or USC or, I don't know, pick any kind of
Salem
school.
State College.
Salem State College. Many of those colleges have alumni networks that have become reinvigorated thanks to technologies like LinkedIn
Right.
or others. And so getting back in touch with that, joining your alumni organization, getting involved that way, going back to your house of worship, getting involved that way. There are local organizations like Built in Chicago. Built in is everywhere now. It's like in 60 different cities, which rounds up the technology throughout the whole area. You can get involved and volunteer there. Let's say you were in the advertising industry. Every single industry has a nonprofit trade association that is desperate for some volunteer help. It's fantastic because you're then meeting the leaders of those industries, helping plan the conferences. It gives you something to talk about. It gives you a place to go. Those are wonderful ways to start getting involved. And so as you're generating or regenerating your network, you can go to conferences everywhere and meet people who are doing innovative and interesting things. Start talking to people, come out of your shell, learn something new, and then carry that back to the nonprofit trade association or your university alumni group, or offer to host or put together a panel discussion. Those are the ways that you make yourself relevant and interesting to future employers.
Because I know I've been at parties where someone discovers that the other person went to the same college, and it could be 20 years apart. And it's like the secret handshake happens. And, no matter how many years away from college you are, there's something about meeting someone who went there. It's like it's a shared life experience, even though it's decades apart.
No, it certainly is. I mean, even as I've started this whole Best Money Moves thing, right? So we started it 3 years ago. And the people that I have met, I mean, I was always involved in, covering, I was a financial journalist I still am, right? So for 25 plus years, involved in writing a nationally syndicated column in my books and radio and all this sort of thing. And I met a lot of titans of the industry, people who are the heads of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and all the big banks and, financial services companies everywhere. But what I'm meeting now is I realized that while I had all of those connections, I really didn't have the connections I needed into companies themselves. And I had to build that network from basically brand spanking new. And so it was finding the right consultants and applying to get into the right kinds of competitions. And how do you, meet the people? So what are the conferences I need to go to, and where do we need to be out in the world engaging in a way that makes sense? And so even though I've been a paid writer and speaker for many years, I volunteered my time speaking, and I volunteered my time writing syndicated columns because I knew it would get our name out, it would get the word out about what we're trying to do, and it would allow me to raise a profile in an area where I had kind of tangentially been very high profile, but never specifically with this particular group. And so as you're starting businesses, which is where this all started, you were asking me about starting this business, understanding the world that you want to enter into and what you need to do to raise your own profile high enough to get people to engage with you, that's where the magic sauce is.
Everyone's looking for the magic sauce, right? So for you, this is, the most bang for your buck.
When you are starting to move into a new world, it always feels, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, it feels exciting and it feels scary. You don't really know what to expect. You don't know how to engage. And you don't know sort of where the juice is going to come from. And so you are thinking to yourself, how am I going to get some traction? I need to get some traction. How am I going to get some traction? So in my world of journalism, I always got traction by going to the top of the heap, right? Everybody I needed to talk to was the CEO or the CMO or the chief economist or whatever of a major financial services company. And I always got my questions answered because I was a, big time financial journalist. Well, suddenly I'm in this new world and I'm kind of like everybody else. So what I was thinking, what could I do to raise awareness of Best Money Moves and how vital and important financial wellness is in a country where 78% of people are going paycheck to paycheck, right? And so I looked around and I thought, well, I know how to write articles and I know how to do posting and I know how to do podcasting and I know how to do videos. What if I volunteered that and started to help out people who maybe didn't know how to do it or needed that help? And so what I did is I started to connect with the right kinds of consultants and the right kinds of industry publications, and I volunteered my time to write, and I offered to help them with their conferences, and I got educated as to who the movers and shakers were and who the next generation were coming in and how I could actually be of assistance to them. And I didn't say to them, here's how you can help me. What I said was, how can I help you? It seems like you could use an extra pair of hands. And no matter what they asked, I always said yes and I'd figured out how to do it later if I didn't know how. And so when I realized that I could engage with people and make their lives easier and leverage that to help explain what Best Money Moves is and give myself some needed credibility, that would be the symbiotic relationship there. That was going to be the magic sauce. And truly, that's what's happened. Is I've found my place in this world of HR and benefits. I've started to understand the trends that are going on, what drives this industry. I'm also seeing outside forces that are coming in through technology companies that are dramatically changing how this workforce thing is going to work. And I've aligned myself with, and our company, with the technologists who I believe are going to fundamentally change this as much as they've changed journalism and as much as they've changed so many other things in our world going forward as I planned and mapped our ability to scale the product. And so there's a lot going on, but I just want to say to anybody who's starting a new business, yeah, it's complicated and it's scary and it's exciting and thrilling and probably the most interesting thing you'll ever do in your life. And I'm very pleased that I'm in my 50s and I'm able to do this. This is really amazing. But it's not like I'm such an outlier. You can do it too.
I think that you live by example in a huge way. What you just said really hit me because clearly you're a woman who values your experience. You know that you have something, you know that you have gifts and experience and expertise and all of these things to offer the world. And that's amazing. I work a lot with women in trying to help them really find their voice and understand their gifts and really lean into them. So you've got that down. You're confident, you're amazing, you're badass. But on the flip side, you were like, hey, this is new. I am willing to put myself out there, not always looking for the nickel, the dime. I have to be paid. Don't you know who I am? I've done all these things, but you put yourself out there. Do you need help? You come from a place of service. You want to be that person that helps other people. So that way, twofold, not only does it help them and you get to learn new experiences, but then on the flip side, when you're ready to share Best Money Moves, these people are in your corner, and it's not like going into it just for them to be in your corner, but it does help. And so I love the two sides of this where you are confident, you know that you have something to offer, but at the same time, you're not so ego driven that you're not willing to come in to do something new from a place of vulnerability, really.
Yeah, you have to be willing to say, I don't know. And and I'm not good at this, by the way. I'm not good at asking for help. I'm the one that everybody comes to for help and answers.
Oh.
But you have to be willing to say, listen, it's not a humble brag. It's true. I have no idea what the heck I'm doing. Can you give me a hand here? And what I found is that when you have a lot to offer, and everybody does, you just have to find it, people are willing to offer help back. And I firmly believe in this policy of extending the hand first. And so, this has worked for me this is my fourth company that I'm launching. It's worked for me for each of the other companies that I've built up. And I feel like we're finally, after 3 years, and let me not just undersell how long a process this has been to get That Money Moves to a place where I think we're about to really hit it out of the park. But it's doable if you break it out into small chunks, and each chunk is doable, and you put one foot in front of the other, and you keep focused on the goal. I had one of our partners say to me, I went to him 2 years ago, I said, we should do a deal. And he said, yeah, I'm not hearing about financial wellness. They're in the student loan space. Now they're back 2 years later. Okay, the world has caught up with you, Ilyce. You were too far ahead. Now we see it. We want to get engaged. Let's move forward. And he said, and the best thing is that you've always stayed true to your vision.
Right.
I see a path for myself, and I'm willing to put my own work, time, and money, blood, sweat, and tears into that path to try to get where I need to be, because I know that there's so much good that we can do for everybody else who's going to come along with us. And so that's how you should position it.
Absolutely. And I think there are a lot of people who would come up with an idea. I mean, I'm the queen of ideas, right? But the fact that you've been pushing and not giving up, there are many people who are like, oh, I'm a year in, I've been trying this. Those people told me they're in the loan space, the student loan space, and not the financial wellness space. Like, maybe this isn't what's right for me, but you stayed with it. And I think that's really a great message for people too, because, the return on investment is not immediate. Even like those overnight sensations that we see have been doing things for 10 or 20 years,
Well, that's how developers are, by the way. And I'll just share this because, when you see a building go up, that's another 10-year overnight success story. So they'll talk about it as if it's, sprung out of the ground like Jack and the Beanstalk. But really, developers had to find the land, put the parcels together, negotiate with those owners, close on the property, then come up with a plan, get that plan through the planning commission, find the attorneys, find the lenders, get those loans done. And then they had to start thinking about digging in the ground. So you realize that a lot of the stuff, it just takes time, and you have to stay with it. And you have to stay focused. And that's why people talk about 5-year business plans, not because they're trying to test you to imagine the future and that you have to be right. It's, do you have a plan? Is there some place you're trying to go, and have you reverse engineered it enough to figure out how you're going to get there? And by the way, let me just point out again, I do not have a business school degree. I did not go to Harvard. I didn't go to Yale. I didn't go to Stanford. This is something that anybody can do if you're smart enough to get somebody engaged with you who does have the missing pieces. You can build a very successful company going forward and just tweak along the way. But you just have to believe in yourself.
I think that you've given my audience a lot to think about today. And if nothing else they get from this is that they can do it, whether it's catching up in their finances or teaching their kids or starting a business, coming from a place of action, a little bit of planning. Sometimes I notice myself and the community can get so bogged down with planning that they forget to move forward. Not so much that you're spinning your wheels that you never get started.
Well, when you feel that you're stuck, and I used to say this to people who would call into my radio show, I said, if you're really stuck is you don't know where to move. You're too afraid to move in any direction. Well, if you find yourself in that place, in my view, any step in any direction is a step forward, because you're actually moving again. So you have to find a way to propel yourself into, any direction, even the wrong direction. It's important to just feel like you've got momentum to something. And generally that leads to a few other things as well.
Right. You're absolutely right. So before I let you go, and I have to ask you, because I ask all my guests, what does it mean to you to 40 Thrive?
Well, now that I'm in my 50s.
Yes. And as I've said many times, though, 40 Thrive, 40 is the beginning. 40 is like the awakening, right? And so this particular show and the community is mostly for women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s.
True. I had that exact experience. So when I turned 26, I was trying to sell a screenplay in Hollywood, and I was freaked out that I was too old, which My good friend Wendy Miller has laughed at me for my ageism like forever, because she's like, you always think you're too old. And really, it's not about thinking I'm too old. It's just that life is passing too quickly. But anyway, I turned 26 and then I stayed 26 until I turned 40. Every year I was 26 again. And when I turned 40, though, I really owned it. I was on TV. I felt really great about myself. I loved where I was in my career. And I threw a huge 40th birthday party. And every year since 40, I've owned my age. I'm 54. This year I'll be 55. I've owned my age, and I've owned the chunk of work that I've gotten done over these past 15 years, because I really feel like it has propelled me to where I am today. I would have never started Best Money Moves if I didn't already know how to do large-scale production, content production work, which I learned how to do in my second company, where we did huge projects for companies like Discover Card and Equifax and a million others. Mm-hmm. And then I started a huge project on a third company for Humana, and I would have never done that had I not done the other two things. And with Best Money Moves, it's like every single piece of my career has come together to make me feel like I can move forward and get this done. And so, my advice to somebody, what does 40 Thrive mean? It means you own it and you can feel good about owning it. And you've now had enough life experience to let you feel confident that those lessons aren't really fake, that you're not a fraud, you're real, you've got something. Now make the most of it.
Amen, Ilyce Glink. That's amazing. Yes. And I could not agree with you more.
It's been a pleasure, trying to go through some of the stuff. I don't really talk about it too much, which is funny. I think I'm more of a doer than a talker. But with your permission, I'd like to invite everybody to follow me on LinkedIn and in Twitter. Engage. I'm happy to help you if I can. Really, and that's a true offer. And then if you're interested in more money stuff, you can go to my other website, thinkglink.com, and we have a free weekly newsletter that has loads of free information about, I think it'll just make you be smarter about how you handle your money. At least I hope so.
Fantastic. I'm going to link to all of that in the show notes, as well as all of your 5 billion books that you have put out there. I mean, there's some really great advice in your books. I was browsing through Amazon, and it was like one after the other, and all in, a lot of real estate, but in different areas that I think we could all learn.
Well, there's great information out there. I would just caution people, don't believe everything you read on the internet. It's not all true, strangely enough. But when you have a book, it's funny how that has to actually be fact checked. So
exactly.
Go back to books, everybody.
Exactly. So I'm going to link to all of those in the show notes. Ilyce, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure, Jackie. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the 40 Thrive podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to get the latest episodes without having to do anything. I mean, really, you'd be crazy not to. Plus, join us over in our private Facebook group where you can meet other women who are just as committed to thriving over 40. I'll catch you next time. Until then, keep thriving. Spring has sprung, and with the change of seasons, sometimes comes an increase in vitality. If you're feeling in the mood for a little more personal time, may I suggest Coconut. Coconut is all about providing clean and natural ingredients when you're enjoying your most intimate moments, with or without a partner. Naturally safe products developed by people who are obsessed with quality. Get 15% off with promo code GROWNASS at grownasswoman.guide/Coconut. That's 15% off with promo code GROWNASS at grownasswoman.guide/Coconut.